You are listening to a podcast created by the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Our mission is to help you understand your world better through geography. Our presenter is Dr. David Lanergan, Professor of Geography at McAllister College in St. Paul and Director of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. I am Fred Kunze, a member of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education.
Chiquita banana, and I'm here to say you should eat a banana every day.
I wonder what this little song has to do with the general idea of what a plantation is, how it differs from a farm, and what it can teach us about how people interact with their environment. In this podcast, students can further develop their skill of listening for details and main ideas. Listen to this podcast and write out your idea of how the following questions might be answered. Make a list of things common to most plantations. Write something which explains how a plantation is different than a farm. List 2 examples of how change for a demand in a product changed how the land was used. This podcast addresses the Minnesota Geography Standard for Grade 4, Code 4.3.4.9.1.
An early form of large-scale commercial agriculture it was called plantation agriculture. As we look at plantation agriculture now, we have to disconnect it from what we've heard about plantation agriculture in the era of European colonial activity, which was plantation agriculture was associated with slavery. Today, plantation agriculture is defined as a type of agriculture that's large-scale and commercially focused. It produces a crop in one climate zone for consumption in another. Generally, plantations are found in the tropics and producing products that are consumed in the temperate climate zones. In most cases, plantations were developed on lands that were not previously in agricultural production, although there are obviously exceptions to that pattern. So large scale, producing products in one climate zone for production in another. Plantations are characterized by large social class distinctions. In most cases, plantations relied on workers who were hired as temporary workers or encouraged to migrate to plantation areas from other locations. As you know, in the 18th and early 19th century, slavery was a major component of plantation agriculture, but now that's not the case, and we have people who are either residents, long-term residents, or new arrivals in plantation areas. One of the most interesting forms of plantation agriculture is the rubber plantations. Rubber is a naturally occurring tree in the Amazonian basin. It was known to the indigenous populations for centuries, had several uses, and then in the 19th century, Europeans discovered a whole new industrial uses for rubber. As you can see in these pictures, rubber is a product of the tree. The tree is scarred, and you can think of this as sap, and the sap runs down this diagonal cut into the tin cup, and the harvesters come through and gather the rubber into larger containers. Before the arrival of plantations, people would go and find trees in the forest and cut them and work through this process. But the agriculturalists realized that if they cleared the forest and planted just rubber trees, it would be more efficient to collect the rubber. The photographs you're seeing of the rubber plantations are not from Brazil, but rather from Malaysia, because the British chafed at the fact that the Brazilians had a monopoly on rubber, and so they were able to smuggle seeds from Brazil to England, to Kew Botanical Gardens. The story is that the seeds were actually carried in a hollow cane out of Brazil to Europe. They were experimented with in the botanical gardens and then taken out to Malaysia, where large-scale rubber plantations were developed. Rubber is so important in the industrial society that efforts were made to produce synthetic rubber, and so rubber plantations, while they still exist, are not as dramatically important part of the economy as they were in the past. Another form of plantation was the banana plantation, and this one we can't say is particularly associated with the United States, but the United States has a long and important history in the development of plantations for bananas. So there are several kinds of bananas. They've been grown for millennium. Bananas are an interesting plant because they don't produce seeds, they produce vegetative production. And what's interesting about the United States experience is the fact that the United Fruit Company created an integrated system of producing bananas on lands in the Central American lowlands, and so going into these areas and bringing people in to work them. And then, because bananas ripen so quickly, they had to develop a system for getting the bananas to the market. So they developed the so-called banana boat that has a particular kind of chemical environment that slows down the ripening of bananas. And they had this fleet of ships that sailed from Central America and the islands in the Caribbean to the cities in the southeast, particularly New Orleans, and to the northeast, New York and Philadelphia, delivered the bananas as quickly as possible to the markets, and then, of course, put on trains and trucks to get to the cities. But that wasn't really enough. They also had to figure out a way to get people to buy bananas and convince them that they were good for them as well as good to eat. And so they developed this very famous salesperson symbol for the banana industry, Chiquita Banana, who had a little song called, Chiquita Banana, and I'm here to say you should eat a banana every day. Anyway, the result of this integrated marketing system was so successful that bananas have now become a staple for most American diets. However, the production of bananas has shifted away from the Caribbean to South America as the lands in the Caribbean were subject to banana diseases and soil exhaustion. Another form of plantation agriculture is very important in Southeast Asia, and that's the palm oil plantation. Here you see the gate to a plantation in Malaysia. You can see it's called the Guthrie Plantation. This is a large corporation that's actually the majority shareholder is now the government of Malaysia. And you can see the words there, Ladang, that's the word for town. So it's the Senkang is the town. And these workers have come to Malaysia from India. So the Malaysian population was not large enough to man these plantations. So the British brought in workers from South Asia to produce the farms. And the palm oil plantations have replaced the rubber plantations in Malaysia because of the diminished demand for natural rubber and the increased demand for palm oil. The landscape is scraped clean of all vegetation. The palm oil trees are planted. You can see from this picture of the harvester, the palm trees are shaken to have the nuts fall down, and then they're picked up mechanically to try to minimize the number of workers. These plantations recycle the land, so 5 to 6 years the trees are cut down, put in these large windrows as you see in these photographs, and a new layer of plantation agriculture, or a new crop of palm oil is put in place. So these are 3 examples of plantation agriculture that exist in the world today. They're all similar in that they're producing crops in one climate zone for production for sale in another, and they are using labor brought in from distant locations because the indigenous population was not willing or large enough to run the plantations. And there is a social difference between the owners of the plantations and the people who work.
You have been listening to a production of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Background music is courtesy of Jim Hogue of Decorah, Iowa. The Minnesota Alliance is a non-profit group of educators and other parties who are interested in promoting an enhanced understanding of our world through improved geographic literacy.